Hello, this is our first inaugural Justice for Greenwood genealogy event. We are excited for you to join us today here in person and online for the Know Your Roots genealogy event happening during Tulsa Juneteenth weekend. Understanding where we came from is a powerful tool in shaping who we are. Our ancestor stories of resilience, strength, and triumphs are foundations of our identity and community. By uncovering your family history, you can connect to your heritage in a profound and meaningful way. My name is Jasmine Henry, and I am the We Are Greenwood Program Director. Thank you again for joining us for this special workshop, Know Your Roots, the genealogy event. I now would like to make introductions to our two genealogists joining us for this presentation and our interactive workshop. The first is Angela Walton-Raji. She's a nationally known genealogist, author, and podcaster who has been conducting family history since 1990s. She has authored 4 books devoted to the freedmen from Oklahoma, once enslaved in the 5 civilized tribes. Her most recent book was published this year by History Press, Oklahoma Freedmen of the 5 Tribes. She has broken new ground with her work on showcasing women who served as civilian employees for the Union Army during the Civil War and presented at national conferences on this topic of the forgotten Black women who were among the first women to work outside the home as paid workers. At the National Genealogy Society Annual Conference of 2023, she was awarded the Malcolm H. Stern Lifetime Achievement Award in Richmond, Virginia, for her unique work of the freedmen from 5 tribes of Oklahoma. After many years in her higher education administration, she is retired from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she served 19 years as the director of graduate school recruitment. Ms. Walton-Raji lives in Maryland, where she continues to research and write. Our next genealogist is our research consultant, Nicka Smith. She's a host and consultant and documentarian with more than 20 years of experience as a genealogist. She has extensive experience in researching the enslaved in the communities and is an expert genealogy research in the Mississippi Delta. She is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Nicka has a diverse and varied experience with her background in audio, video, and written communication. She has appeared on Today, Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC, is an Emmy Award-winning episode with the series Who Do You Think You Are, which was featured for the groundbreaking short film, A Dream Delivered, The Lost Letters of the Hawkins Williamson, and also has been interviewed by the National Geographic Time, US Today, and the New York Times. She is the host of Black Pro Gen Live, an innovative web show with more than 130 episodes focused on people of color, genealogy, family history. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Angela Walton to begin our presentation.
Okay, well, welcome to the experience of exploring your family history. This is something that is going to take you on an amazing journey where you're going to find not just the names of people, but we hope that you're going to really look in depth at all the things that you're going to find and some of the things you already have in the home, and to find some of those stories, those hidden stories, forgotten stories. And this is partly what genealogy does. It takes you on this amazing journey. So let's proceed to the next slide. Now, of course, our objective and our purpose. Well, our purpose is, of course, here at Justice for Greenwood, we want to be able to assist you with your family history. But for me, it's always an objective of mine to teach you how to go and find some of those records on your own. Next slide, please. Now, what is the exact definition of genealogy? Well, as you can see, it's an account of the descent of a person, family, or group from an ancestor or from older forms. But what does that really mean? It means that you're going to find those stories and hopefully you're going to interact with some elders who will help you make those stories just a wee bit better. Next slide, please. Basic genealogy, of course, we always tell you start with yourself. Now, I know the reaction is, well, I know my name, I know myself. But what does that mean? Well, a lot of times you pull out that pen and paper, that pad of paper, and yes, put your name. But one of the things people don't realize, people will say, oh, I'd like to go back as far as the slave ship arriving in America or whatever. But if you can't get to even your grandparents in 1950, it's going to be a challenge. So you're going to start with yourself, write your name. write the names of your parents. Remember, you have two parents, but every generation that you go back, those ancestors double. You have four grandparents, you have eight great grandparents, you have 16 great great grandparents, and so on. And of course, one of the things you're going to be doing, you're going to be looking for names, but also the dates and the places. One of the things I always encourage people to do is to certainly place your genealogical research with two things in mind: time and place. And of course, those relationships, because when you find those documents, you're going to see names and you're going to say, well, who's this in the house in 1940 with my grandfather? I've never heard that name. And you might find a relationship that you were unaware of. So, when you get started, you're going to start right at home. You're going to start with what I call the family archives. Now, before you say, I don't have an archives, I'll bet you do. There's probably a stash of old pictures, old photo albums, and there's somebody in your family. If it's a woman, I call her Funeral Mary because she goes to everybody's funeral. And when she comes back with the funeral program, the obituary. And it's in a shoebox, it's in a drawer, it may be in a brown paper bag, but those funeral programs hold a lot of information. It's usually the biography of the person who is deceased. So you're going to start at home. You're going to look for those obituaries. You're going to look also for those old photo albums. But don't discount the papers. There's a drawer that might have an old license. Maybe someone was a chauffeur. You may find someone who was a beautician or a barber, and there's their old license allowing them to pursue their profession in that particular state. But one of the things you want to do is to talk to the family members. You want to talk to those elders, talk to not just, well, my grandpa or grandparents have passed away, but are there any aunts who are still living? Those are elders, and they may still hold a wealth of data for you. And of course, you're going to find as you really embark on this journey, every piece of paper is important, not just something you're going to see on a screen when you start dabbling on these websites, Ancestry and Family Search and others, but you're going to print them out. And that paper is going to grow very, very quickly. But you're going to start to look at census records. You're going to look at old marriage records, old insurance files, old insurance papers, and more. Military records, the old discharge of grandpa when he got out of World War II. All of these pieces of paper are very, very important. Let's look at the next slide. And again, I've already stated some of these, but one of the things people don't realize, there are certain type of records called vital records. Vital records are the records that record the three primary events in your life: birth, marriage, and death. But I always like to say, throw in those divorce records too. Divorces do occur. And sometimes you get a lot of good information from those records. But the census records, you're going to start to look at those. But did someone pass away and will some property to those descendants? Those are probate records, and those are found in the courthouse where you would locate wills, probate records. But many are digitized and you can find them. Funeral programs, but also those headstones. You might visit a cemetery and say, well, what is this symbol here? Oh, great grandpa was a Mason, or great grandma was in the Eastern Star. There's so many things that you're going to find. I already mentioned military discharges, all kinds of things there. If you see a piece of paper in a dresser drawer of maybe an elder who passed away, and it has perhaps grandfather or great grandfather's discharge information, or you see another type of military paper, DD 214. A lot of good information that's there. And of course, there are also other kinds of records reflecting the property that they owned. Were they people who purchased property? Was an abstract done on the family's property at one point, especially if they came from the country? Are there tax records that reflect that? And don't forget Bible records. That old Bible, if it's not in your house, it may be in grandma's house, or it may be in Aunt Ellen's house or somewhere. A lot of good information is there, particularly dates of birth and death. Really useful. if you're lucky. Now, all churches don't have great records, but it can be a wonderful resource for you. But also, as I said, genealogy, time and place, whatever county they lived in, learn something about that county's history. You may find a little bit more information that can open some doors for you. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of how to start your genealogy, Nicka Smith is going to give you some amazing advice in terms of really what steps to take. Nicka, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Angela. You have really laid out a lot of the basic foundational things that you need to consider when you are beginning your family history journey. And I'm going to take you through the practical steps that we take that when we're starting trees for folks that we work with for Justice for Greenwood, or even in our own personal pursuits when we're just trying to figure out family structures. These are literally the steps that we take. And once you get them down, you're able to replicate them throughout your journey in genealogy. So let's go to the next slide so we can get started. All right. We talked a lot about the home repository or the home archive. We talked about, military records, deed records, all those things, birth, marriage, and death certificates. You're going to be very intentional about gathering these things together because they are your primary sources when it comes to genealogy and family history. And while there may be the rush to go online and try to get these things or replicate these things, please be sure to use the home repository because here's the thing, there are some aspects of our lives that are not captured in online records yet. And sometimes that's due to privacy issues, or it could be that the collection just isn't made available outside of the bounds of a library or a state archives or even with vital statistics. And so you may have some data and some information online, or you may have some information at your house that you cannot find online. So be sure to really take care of and gather those records that are in your home or in the homes of relatives. You also may want to read some books about genealogy just to get yourself familiar with some of the terms, like what's an Onentafel report, or what's a register report, or what's a pedigree chart as opposed to a family tree. What's the difference between a first cousin and a first cousin once removed? And I can tell you right now that your first cousin's child is not your second cousin. It's your first cousin once removed. So learning to those terms can help you, especially if you decide to take the plunge and get into things like DNA. You'll be able to map out the relationships a little bit more easily. The other advice that we have to give you as well is to focus on one person at a time, especially when you're dealing in eras, especially if you're talking about baby boomers. There are going to be 50 people named Barbara. There are going to be sisters named Martha and Mary, all of that kind of stuff popping off. And you want to be sure that you are tracing and looking at the correct people. And if you are jumping from branch to branch in your family, things can get confusing. You might have two aunts named Ernestine and you can't remember which one was born when. Just stick to one person at a time and really one branch of your family at a time. So then that way you don't get too derailed. Next slide. Now, once you've gathered your records and you've talked to your family members, one of the ways that you can get organized is through a binder. You can literally just go to your office store, nearby store, get some of those clear sheet protectors and put some of the documents that you have in your home archive within that binder. Additionally, you can also, if you have family members that may not want you to have the originals of those documents and photos, you can use your phone as a scanner, or you can buy a scanner and you can organize them on your computer into computer folders and just name your files. Be sure that you're deliberate about naming those files. A lot of us live out of the downloads folder and we don't rename things, but you want to be deliberate about your organization so that anyone can get back to your files, whether it's you or whether it's someone else that you might be leaving the research to. So be very intentional about that. The other thing you can do if you don't necessarily like a binder, or you don't just want to take the approach of just scanning your files or your documents and putting them on your computer, is you can also put them into a database. And you can use a standalone genealogy software like Family Tree Maker or Legacy, or you can build a free family tree on sites like Ancestry or Family Search. And that will help you just kind of get the people who are in play more organized. You can type in a name and search for it as opposed to having to go through a binder and look through sheets of paper or even scrolling through your computer to try to find the files that relate to a specific person. So really, at the end of the day, it's all what works best for you. If you like more of a manual and sort of analog system, stay with that. If you want it to be online, you want to have access to it through your phone and other means, then create a system that is online. But at the end of the day, do what works best for you. Next slide. Now, in addition to gathering all the records, in addition to finding out the system that works best for you, we also want you to do your homework. Well, that means, again, you're going to go back to that statement that Ms. Angela made around identifying what you already know. Many people don't think that they know enough about their family history, but if you know even a small amount, that can help you get back several generations. So start with what you know. And start with yourself and work backwards. And that means go from you to your parents to your grandparents. A lot of folks, when they get into genealogy, they have a question they want to answer. It may be a lot of times connected to them being related to a famous person. And we typically tell people don't start there because folks will make a jump without having done all the work that they need to do to connect them to that individual, as opposed to just making an assumption. So if you start genealogy correctly, again, starting with you, putting down what you know about yourself, obviously, what you know about your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents. You have to remember that each generation, the number of ancestors doubles. So you have 2 parents, you have 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents, and so on. And then you want to review what you have, because when you start to build your tree out, especially if you're using an online database, those documents that we had you gather from the home repository or the home archive, they're going to inform some of the names. Let's say you don't know the name of a great grandparent, but you have a death certificate for your grandparent. You can pull the name of that great grandparent off of the name off of the death certificate of your grandparent. And you can continue to do that throughout the generations, right? But if you're not organized with the information that you have from the home repository, you can't call that information up as quickly. Next slide. And then you also want to expand your sources, right? Like, this is when you really lean on your family members or people who are older than you in your family to guide you. Because they've been alive longer than you have, more likely, and they may remember some of these individuals that you never got a chance to meet. And so making sure that you maintain and engage in quality and great relationships with your elders is important. For me, something that I do is that I have like a standing phone call with these individuals where I call them maybe once a month. And I even give them a notebook that if I haven't called them in a little bit, they can write down something that they wanted to tell me in it. And then that way, when I call the next time, they can say, oh, you know what? I meant to tell you about this, because they've been probably eager for somebody to have these conversations with them, to ask about the family history. And in those conversations, you can also ask them about documents that they have within their possession. You also can start going online and looking at public records, right? Things like births, marriages, deaths, newspapers, all the different resources that Miss Angela talked about. You can even look at internet sources or things that just exist solely online. People often ask what the best, genealogy site is. And I always say it's wherever the records are. There isn't one that has the, cornered the market, because it all depends on where your ancestors were living. So for instance, for me, I have a grandparent from Oklahoma. I have one from Louisiana that Oklahoman ancestor married. Where I look for records for each of them depends on, again, it depends on the location and how open the records are. Where I may lean more on Genealogy Bank for my Louisiana ancestry because of their connection to New Orleans, I may rely more on Ancestry for Oklahoma because that's where records tend to be for that as well. So I'm going to go to anywhere where the records are, and that could be a state archives, it could be one of the larger genealogy sites, it could be a newspaper site, it could be a number of different places. Next slide, please. And you also want to make sure that you cite your sources, because you want to be able to get back to the original stuff. I can tell you that when I first started genealogy, I was kind of saving everything and I wasn't being totally intentional about my sources. And now that I've been in this for a long time, I'm having to go back over a lot of work because I didn't save where I got it from. And don't just automatically think that some of these websites are going to be around forever. You need to make sure that you're super clear where you got things from. Make sure that you're using things that are published or that are cited well, that actually give you the source, not just Miss Angela said it on her blog, and she didn't say exactly where she got the information from. You want to be very intentional about that. There's also archival records where you can actually go on site at like a university or college or a state archives where they actually have the old records, even the National Archives. You can go and pull things like Civil War pensions for veterans who fought in the Civil War, and they will actually give you the actual file. And you're sitting there like, how in the world did I get this real thing? How are they letting me touch it? But they allow you to touch it. There's also records on microfilm, and some of you may be too young to remember microfilm or microfiche, where it literally is photographed records on film, and you have to use a machine. Usually now that's a electronic machine to get through those records. Records exist in all different types of formats, whether digitized, whether in paper form in the original form, or whether in microfilm form. Next slide. Now, again, with your family tree, you're gonna make sure that you get all those documents together, have those conversations with your family members. Again, you're going to identify all that stuff. You're going to have it all together in that binder or in that digitized folder. And again, you're going to record everything that's there. Use those locations, use those dates for all the various events, for birth and marriages and deaths and divorces and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing is you want to make sure that you're clear about your goals from the beginning. And your goals may change over time. Maybe initially it's you're trying to figure out if you're related to Bass Reeves, and that's your initial goal. And then maybe you just, dispel the myth that you are related to him and you move on to something else. You can totally change it. It's a moving target. It's fine. But if you decide early on what you want to learn, and maybe if you have a list of 5 things, maybe if you kind of hit a wall with one, you can move to another one so that you can maintain your momentum in the family history journey. And next slide, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over back to Jasmine so she can talk about our J for G genealogy project.
For that introduction to genealogy. I hope that was very informative and gets you excited to start your own genealogy or just continue your genealogy into discovering your family history. So here is how you can continue to join the Justice for Greenwood genealogy project. So with our genealogy project, we work with these world-class genealogists to research, identify, and document the lineage of every individual and entity that experienced the Tulsa Race Massacre and its immediate aftermath. Through this project, we also create family trees. We design and maintain a comprehensive roll of documented massacre victims as well. So how does the program work? A person first either believes or thinks that they might meet a Greenwood descendant. So they would go to our online website at justiceforgreenwood.org and go under genealogy project. They would fill out and complete the genealogy intake form. You would also submit supporting documentation. There is a list of what supporting documentation you could submit, but like the genealogist had mentioned, those could be birth certificates, death certificates. Those will be the most helpful to making sure that we can connect you to your Greenwood ancestor. Next, as the Justice for Greenwood Program Director, I enter this information into our internal system, and then I'll assign your case to one of our genealogists. When there is a common or shared ancestor among the descendants, sometimes our genealogist will confidentially utilize the shared ancestor records. This is not the records of the living descendants. We use that to complete their research. So none of the records submitted to us, including any personally identified information, will be made public and will only be used for genealogical research unless you give us permission. Next, the genealogist will use the information to research the person's familial connection to Greenwood. So there's some criteria. First, they must be able to locate the identified ancestor in Greenwood from 1921 to 1923. Second, they must be able to connect the ancestor to the descendant, which is typically done through these vital records. That's why we need those supporting documentations. So we need things like your birth certificate or death certificate. The genealogist will then create a report of their findings and indicate whether the person is self-identified, chronicled, or pending chronicled descendant. The Justice for Greenwood Foundation then provides the descendant with a digital copy of the report in a large-scale impact type of presentation form. And so if the person is chronicled, that means the genealogists were able to locate their ancestor in Greenwood from 1921 to 1923, and they were able to connect the ancestor to the descendant. If a person is either self-identified or they're pending chronicled, then that means they just need to provide us with possibly more information to help us do the research further. So sometimes it's difficult to locate an ancestor in Greenwood from 1921 to 1923 because of lost records. Sometimes people were not counted in the census or for various other reasons, which has resulted from the destruction from the massacre and continues with the harm that's being done. Because of this, we understand, and so we will accept some credible family resources, scholarly resources, business documentation, such as affidavits of Greenwood historians, City of Tulsa directories, Tulsa Star newspaper, family Bibles, and or oral histories of known recognized Greenwood community residents and other recognized experts or credible sources. So that's how the genealogy project works. So how do you join? So like I said, go to our website, complete the genealogy intake form, and then we will get started on your genealogy. Why is this work necessary? As a part of this work, we're trying to create a record of the supporting documentation, and it's necessary for several reasons. One, we want to ensure that there will be no barriers to descendants gaining the full benefits of any resources that become available as the result of our ongoing fight for reparations for victims and survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre and their descendants. We also want to connect the Greenwood diaspora and the families that were dispersed and had ties destroyed as a part of the violence and continuing harm for the first time. We want to protect the credibility and legacy and integrity of the members of the Greenwood community and of the descendant community. And then we also want to counter historical omissions and misrepresentations. There's also no definitive record of descendants that exist, and it's clear that it needs to be created. Currently, the government isn't doing so, and we don't really trust them to do it. So that's why we are here to try to get that done, because it needs to get done. Finally, we want to protect the credibility and legacy and integrity of our Justice for Greenwood Foundation, and by participating in this process, you're helping us and the Greenwood diaspora by contributing to the creation and of this historical and unprecedented record that's not have been created before. So please join our project if you think you're a descendant. Even if you're not a descendant and you want to support Justice for Greenwood, there's multiple ways to do that. Up on the screen, there's different ways to give monetary support to the foundation. You could also volunteer with us. There's numerous events that we host or are a part of throughout the year. And so please follow us on social media and go to our website for more information. Thank you again for the people that attended online and in person. We will have a short Q&A for the in-person group. And for those of you that still have questions online, please feel free to email us at wag@justiceforgreenwood.org. That's WAG@justiceforgreenwood.org. Thank you again.